a presentation that I hope addresses all of these questions. And if by chance there's something nagging at you, or you didn't quite get the answer you wanted, please do follow up. I want to answer everyone's questions, and I'm more than happy to follow up with you there. So Brett will be guiding the deck. So next slide, please. All right. So as we understood it, we kind of divided the questions into 4 separate categories here, and I'll be covering why do we do bikeways in Denver and our design standards and guidelines, and then we'll transition to Brett, who will be talking about evaluation and what's next. So next slide, please. So as you know, big picture, really quickly, Denver moves everyone is our big planning North Star. The effort is complete, which brought all of our plans, Denver moves pedestrians and trails, bikes and transit, and Vision Zero into one uniform vision that prioritizes us and helps the city move all together to achieve its very ambitious mobility goals. But this is the plan with the implementation strategy to help us achieve those goals. And you may ask, well, why do we need a plan? Does it just sit, collect dust on a shelf? And that is a fair criticism of plans in the past, but we have really grown a lot now, and tried to put together not just big visionary documents, but put an actual teeth behind them by giving us strategies for funding and strategies for implementation, so that we can get the most out of these projects, and so that we can meet our simultaneous goals with a single project. But just to talk about the need, it had been 15 years since our last strategic plan. A bunch of people have moved to Denver. Our technology has changed, and we are much more conscious and aware and focused on addressing our environmental goals. And unfortunately, we're seeing an increase in our fatal crashes. So the need is now more than ever to make bold and strong choices that address these issues. And behind and the underpinning of the Denver Moves Everybody are these goals. Trying to move more people, making sure that it's safe, making sure that the system is sustainable, making sure that it meets the needs of the community, and that we're doing high quality projects, things that are meaningful, memorable, and safe. So how are we going to achieve these goals? The biggest issue, and coming from or addressing some of the public comments we received earlier, clearly, safety is a concern, and we need to do things that are safe. If it's not safe, we're not going to do it. So we need to improve safety. And by doing bike, we know scientifically it's documented and backed by data that as we do bikeway projects, install them on the road, that there's a strong correlation with decreasing serious traffic fatalities and injuries. We also, just to kind of bring everybody up to speed, we just celebrated reaching the mayor's goal of doing 125 miles of bikeways in 5 years. We blew past that, did 137. We've done 19 miles of bike projects just in this quarter alone, which is more than what we did in 2019, the entire year. So we're doing a great job there. We need to get more people walking and biking in the mobility action plan. It was, our goal is to have 15% of people walking and biking in Denver. That's still our goal, but we have a ways to go. And one of the areas where we're making a strong progress is increasing people's access to high comfort bike facilities. So when we started this really concerted effort in 2018 or so, it was approximately 37% of households. All Denver households were within 1/4 mile of a high comfort bike facility. Now we're over half of all Denverites are within 1/4 mile. And we want to be in 2030, we want to have all of Denver covered with access to high comfort facilities that actually change behavior. And how you get that is by building high quality, safe, comfortable bike facilities. Okay, next slide, please. And yeah, as I mentioned, Vision Zero is our priority. And this year we completed the revision of our Vision Zero action plan, giving us new goals and looking at the city again to address these hotspots where we know traffic fatalities and serious injuries are occurring, and then coming up with really strong measures to do what we can control, which is engineering to good behavior and engineering to the type of behavior that we want to see on the roadways. Okay, so yeah, to talk about next, complete streets and bikeway design standards. So you may know several years ago, we finished the Complete Streets Design Guidelines, and that was the first part of a two-part effort to rethink and inject our updated and more contemporary values into our design of the roadway. And the last time we had done this, I think it was updated in 2017. And it was really before we were getting a lot of momentum towards rethinking our streets. And honestly, this had happened before we had these really major landmark visionary planning documents like Game Plan coming out of Parks and Blueprint Denver coming out of CPD, and the plans that DOTI and at the time Denver Public Works was producing. So the Complete Streets Design Guidelines really prepared the way for us to update our standards. And the importance of standards is that anytime a new road is built or a road is retrofitted, the standards dictate that that the road should be built in the way that we want it to, and to reflect our standards, where vulnerable users of the road are given dignity and safety and through design. And those work in concert with our bikeway design, but design manuals where those are specific measurements and guidance related to bike facilities, whereas the Complete Streets Design Guidelines is a larger, broader perspective of city streets related to the land use and their context. And so the Complete Streets Design Guidelines might recognize and identify the need for a bike facility on a given street, but then the bike design manual would dictate what that facility would look like in terms of X feet wide and which facility we actually choose. Next slide, please. And you kind of mentioned this earlier. So what the really great thing about the Complete Streets Design Guidelines is that it cleared the path for us to update our standards. So we're in the process of updating our standards. Those should be complete in the very short future, and hopefully we can come back and walk you through what those are, and the big moves and big shifts and what those look like. And again, the importance of having both of these documents is that the Complete Streets Design Guidelines help explain the why. The what is the standards, but the why is how do we choose between competing needs for the public right of way given this specific context? The standards tell you how wide the sidewalk should be, but the Complete Street Design Guidelines tell us the sidewalk shouldn't compete with this use, or if we want sidewalks here, it's going to have to come at the expense of another travel lane and so forth. It helps guide us and make those complicated decisions when there are trade-offs. Next slide, please. Just to, there were some questions about how we choose and bike facilities depending on, the street. And this really is a major point of emphasis for our team. Basically, at any given street, we look at how many cars are using the road and how fast those cars are going. And depending on what we get back, it determines what type of facility the street would look like. So on very low volume roads with very low volumes of low speeds is where we would introduce a shared roadway condition, like a neighborhood bikeway, reinforced with traffic calming to emphasize low speeds, or diversion to emphasize low volumes. Once you get above a certain threshold, you then would go into a bike lane where you're removing a car from traffic. And then finally, when the speeds get to a point where it's not comfortable to just have a bike lane, then you would get a shared use lane, or excuse me, a protected bike lane or shared use path. So complete physical separation from the traffic volumes. Next slide, please. So we have 3 arrows in our quiver with respects to delivering bike projects. One is the community transportation networks, which I'm sure you've heard much about, and we are continuing that process. We'll be starting North Denver towards the end of this year, going into next year. And that's taking the network approach of looking at how people move within their part of the city at a scale that readily replaces vehicle trips, quick, shorter trips to parks, schools, health centers, business districts, things like that. And looking at how people on bikes, people taking transit, and people walking can have better infrastructure. So the community transportation networks has really been a big engine for us to deliver a high volume of projects. Of course, relying on the support of the Denver voters and passing bonds has been a way for us to build very high quality projects, meaningful projects with lasting infrastructure that help change behavior and give people safe, comfortable facilities to bike on. And then also the quick wins and the financially efficient way to get projects in a short time frame is the bike program. We know that on any given year, or every 3 to 5 years, our city roadways are repaved. And when we have a street with a proposed bike facility on it, it makes sense for us to do the planning and engineering so that when they go back and add new markings, we can take advantage of that and put in new bike facilities. Next slide, please. I mentioned this a little bit earlier, but just the community transportation networks. We are in the thick of it right now. We have, I think, 60 plus projects in various phases of final design and construction. So we are all engines go here, and it's a really exciting time for people who are bike fans or bike curious, because we will be delivering a lot of projects that are rapidly going to expand but people's mobility and improve that number that we're working towards, and providing people with connectivity to high comfort bike facilities. Next slide. So the community transportation networks, we were met with some interesting challenges in terms of when it kicked off. I remember the meeting was March 9th, 2020, and we had a public meeting at, I believe it was Manual High School. And then the very next day, I didn't come back to work. And we all went home, and we had to rethink about how we did our public outreach. And we had to build this airplane as we flew. Next slide, please. So we quickly adapted, went to virtual, and everyone was learning how to do Zoom and Microsoft Teams, but it ended up being this really great, silver lining on the storm cloud, and that we were able to reach so many people, tens of thousands of comments, and we learned with the community and how to solicit comments and facilitate conversations and reach people in their homes. And we found that we captured a lot of comments and feedback way larger than the typical people who were showing up at a public meeting, on a good day, 30 to 40 people. Instead, we were getting meetings with 200, 300 people, which was fantastic. Just so much great feedback that we received. And next slide. So we tried to leave no stone unturned. And then the bond, and then hopefully we've got there's another bond in our future here, but bonds really are such a valuable resource to the city, in that they allow us to build high quality infrastructure and tap into resources that otherwise weren't identified. They really help move the needle, and they've just been an incredible boon to the transportation and mobility in Denver. Next slide. And then bike paving. So it's quite impressive. I know people are unhappy about the potholes and roadway conditions, and it's not for lack of effort. Every year we do 400 to 500 miles of paving, And it's like I said, a great opportunity to, to take advantage of that repaving and put in bike facilities. Next slide. Okay, bikeway evaluation. Is this you, Brett?
I believe it is. Yeah, can you hear me, David?
I can, loud and clear.
All righty, thanks. Thank you, everyone. As David mentioned, my name is Brett Boncory. I'm with the DOTI implementation group. So within our group, we do the design and construction of particularly these bikeway facilities, but many other projects within DOTI. And I'm specifically in the design group. And so here today I was asked to talk to you guys a little bit about our bicycle or our bikeway and Vision Zero evaluation that we're undertaking right now. And so this slide is somewhat of just admission that sometimes we mess up too, and we're constantly iterating and constantly learning from these implementations. As David said, we do have an ambitious plan to try to roll out a lot of bikeway mileage very quickly. When we do this, sometimes we're learning on the fly. And so sometimes we have to go back and make tweaks in the field during or after construction that simply weren't or couldn't have been caught in the planning and design process. And so that's just kind of an acknowledgement and a little bit of an expectation that a little bit of this is going to happen. We do our best in planning and design to try to get it right away, but sometimes there's simply things that we can't catch until implementation occurs. And just to say, we also, because of that, we appreciate when you let us know, because sometimes we can actually make those tweaks pretty quickly. And kind of as part of that consistent iteration, we obviously have this massive rollout of bikeways, over 125 miles in the last 5 years, as David mentioned, and particularly with our community transportation network, package 1, which are either very recently constructed or currently in construction. We wanted to use this opportunity to actually evaluate the performance of these bikeways. We get tons of questions, first of all, about this. How are they even doing from a safety and comfort standpoint? Are we meeting our metrics? But then secondly, we want to obviously continue to refine how we do these things. Bikeway design in particular seems to be an ever evolving practice. And so we want to make sure we're out in front and seeing exactly what's going on with our bikeways and evaluating that. So we do have our bikeway and Vision Zero evaluation project that is currently being conducted. And the purpose of that, of course, is to evaluate the performance of these bikeway and traffic safety treatments. As part of this, as you might imagine, we're collecting before and after speeds, before and after conflict behaviors, volumes of all users. So as David mentioned, on our neighborhood bikeways in particular, we want to see a certain low volume of vehicles, right? And then we also want to see what the volume of bikes has been, how that has changed due to the bikeway implementation. We're also looking at maintenance with our maintenance partners within DOTI, how their experiences are with these things and how we can tweak them according to that. Of course, crash patterns, comfort, and more. And really, these bikeways are applied on such a broad level in so many different contexts that we really need to look at all these different data relative to roadway and land use characteristics, like the width of the road, speed limit, and presence of parking, because even those 3 examples can completely change how the data looks. For instance, speeds, right? If there is parking or if there isn't parking on that roadway. And then at the end of that evaluation, we do plan on having some recommendations coming from that based on what we're seeing, data-driven approach to modify our future planning and design practices through the different documents that, some of the documents that even David mentioned earlier, like the Complete Streets Guidelines and the Bicycle Design Manual. From a timeline standpoint, we are actually just now starting our after data collection. And that's because, again, a lot of these CTNs just went in, and we usually need to we need to give some time for travel patterns to kind of normalize after that, right? To make sure we're getting a good sample size there. So our after data collection is starting now and we'll roll through November. And we plan to have a draft evaluation report kind of reporting on some of those findings in late 2023. But we thankfully do have some initial results that we can report on, thanks to a partnership with the University of Colorado at Denver, UCD. Ken Schruppel and his planning class, every year we partner with them on a mobility or safety project of some sort for his students. And we partner with them, and actually DSP, I think I saw Jill on the call, who was very involved with this. Thanks, Jill. And to kind of collaborate on a project together. And our evaluation project was the perfect kind of collaboration opportunity. So I do have a couple results I can report out on that the students actually did gather through some intercept surveys and some existing conditions mapping and recommendations that they shared out. This slide kind of just showing the folks that they did interview. I will say, and there's an asterisk here, this evaluation was done, started in August of last year. So a lot of these new CTN projects that we're doing our evaluation project on were not even built yet. So a lot of the results that we see are actually from any bikeways that would have been built before then, which some of our bike bond elevate projects that David mentioned had been built then, certainly some of our bike paving projects, and then other bond and CIP projects that had been built before then. And this kind of shows the population that was surveyed. You can see, a majority were actually was split. 33% were interested but concerned. 33% were that enthused and confident group, and then you had 22% of the strong and fearless. So felt like we got a pretty good split of folks that were interviewed here by the students. And one big takeaway here was actually pretty positive, I think. Respondents were simply asked, what was your change in experience walking, rolling, or bicycling on these different streets since the project was implemented? And as you can see, for neighborhood bikeways, that's NB. I'm sorry, I probably should have spelled that out. On neighborhood bikeways, 64% of people said either somewhat or much better after their experiences were improved there, which is promising. And then on our protected bike lanes, PBLs, on the second row, you can see that 77% said that their experience walking, biking, or rolling on that street was somewhat better and much better. So that's certainly good initial information. And then to kind of dive down into a little bit more specifics, we were kind of trying to determine the difference between PBLs and neighborhood bikeways as well. Generally speaking, users felt similarly safe and comfortable using both of those bikeway types. They said, and maybe this is an obvious statement, that they would use more active modes like walking and biking much more often if we had more PBLs. And they felt that, generally speaking, for both kind of treatments, PBLs and protected bike lanes and neighborhood bikeways, that they equally made the neighborhood better. 66% said better for both of those treatments. And then kind of one-off type input that we received from the UCD students and the public that they interviewed was certainly that the traffic circles needed to be improved aesthetically, and a lot of our flex posts and paint improvements. It's something that is common, and that they'd like to see more signage indicating the presence of a bikeway. So thankfully, our new rollout in CTN and our CTN rollout that are being constructed right now did take, really actually did improve upon some of our older design already. So some of the aesthetics and of the traffic circles in particular, and the increased signage will be changed with the rollout of many of these bikeways that are under construction right now. So that's the evaluation study. David, did you want me to continue to go on how we track progress?
I can, if you'd like.
One. Yeah, go for it.
Yeah. So, one question, one of the things we talk about is bike lane miles. And so, what that looks like is for a one-way street, if there's a bike facility, a bike facility on it, but it's only going in one way, then it's one way. If we have a protected bike lane on a stretch of mile that goes two ways, then it's 2 miles. And the same thing for a neighborhood bikeway. If it's 2 directions, if bicycles can travel in both directions, it's 2 miles of bike lane miles. But if it's if a neighborhood bikeway is on a one-way street, then it would count for 1 mile. And what's next for the bike program? So actually really some really exciting stuff. So the bike network verification studies, that's a soup of jargon there. But what's actually really exciting about it is that when we look at our proposed bike network, a lot of the stuff that's proposed there were lines that were drawn on a map in 2015. And what we found out is when we were going out in the community networks and we had an idea for a proposed bike facility, that the what was proposed and what actually needed to be implemented were completely off. And that we had made a bunch of financial projections based on these assumptions, and also that we've grown and evolved as a city, and that our values were demanding that we do better infrastructure. So we had spent a lot of money and time and effort trying to level set and get us, set up with the best infrastructure that we thought, and where we thought we were maybe a lot closer to implementing some bike infrastructure. So the network verification study is going to make sure what's proposed aligns with our values. And so that now when we have a bike paving project, or we go for another bond, or when we implement the next round of community transportation networks, that what is proposed is the best, latest, most up-to-date, backed by data decision. Yeah, and we will be coming back and sharing about progress and efforts there in the fall. So we'll be coming back to you. And what's next? Is that it, Brett?
I believe that's it, David. Yep.
All right. That's all she wrote, folks.
Do we have questions for our presenters from the board? Joe?
Yeah, I had a couple of questions. One for David. You mentioned lasting infrastructure, and I, wonder what's going to happen with somebody just called them the straws. Those can't be considered lasting infrastructure. Is there some plan? I know you got to get all these bike lane miles so you can put it in your reports, but it seems that that's not a lasting infrastructure. It's not a very pretty infrastructure.
Sure.
And so what's the next step after you've got all this stuff going?
Yeah.
Is that going to be morph into something else, or
yeah, great
what?
question. Yeah, so with the bollards were never intended to be the end state, but we also didn't want to let perfect be the enemy of good, and we know that good can actually help us, rapidly, quickly address our Vision Zero needs and goals. So we're using that to get stuff in the network, build the network, build levels of biking. And then what the bike network verification study is also going to do is help us come up with a plan to upgrade those and make them permanent. The ideal end state would be, things you see like on 14th or Marion, concrete, or City Esplanade, like cast, concrete protection. So that's the end goal.
Thank you. I got one more question, and that's Brett. I'm just wondering how far down how detailed you get with evaluating that, because I know some bike areas, just certain corners, you just don't feel safe. You'll be going down a bike lane. I can imagine on Quebec, when you go down heading south and you hit 20th, then all of a sudden you got to make a hard left turn. And I don't think there's a stop sign for cars, but it says look out, basically. And so that's not really the message that I think we want to get across to you. So do you look at those situations? That's where there's a right turn lane, and I don't think the cars are slowing down, and the bikes have to cross that to go straight. So are you getting to that level of detail to see what works and what doesn't work?
Great question, Joe. Yes. Yeah, we are. So in addition to like speeds and volumes along, stretches, and we want to know that, we are actually using like video data to look at those conflict points. That's what I kind of meant by conflict behavior, where we have those right turns across bike lanes in particular. We're looking at behavior. So like near misses, how many times, there was a quote unquote conflict perceived there. And then we're actually also looking at turning speeds is a big, like very quantitative metric that we're using at some of these locations. Because in a lot of instances, when we do these PBLs, we're actually trying to slow down turning movements as much as possible. And so that's another quantitative metric that we're using to try to quantify if that conflict has gotten any better or not.
Thanks.
So it's a great question. Yeah.
Alan,
Hey, David. Hey, Brett. Thank you guys for joining us. First of all, you guys, I live in one of the neighborhoods, Northwest Community Transportation Network. Thank you. Massive improvements. Taking my kids to school every day and just getting around and going shopping and such. So thank you guys for all the great work you've done. I love the statistic you showed on the surveys, breaking down the levels of showing users would use certain active transportation more if more protected bike lanes versus neighborhood bikeways. That delta there between, so first of all, congratulations on the protected bike lane. That's really cool to see how much you're moving the needle with that. It's massive. Certainly neighborhood bikeways, 23% is nothing to sneeze at, but I'm really curious, based on, David, I've had chats with you before in community meetings. I'm a big fan of diverters and things like that, but you know, I'm based, what tools are you guys thinking about using from your toolkit to up that number for neighborhood bikeways? What do you guys have on the table that you think would get more people that are in that concerned but interested group to really get out there and feel comfortable using these neighborhood bikeway facilities?
Yeah.
I mean, I'd say go, yeah, Brett, yeah, correct me if I'm wrong, but I would say it's like, it's a lot of things. It's, you know, there, I don't think there's one, you know, silver solution that addresses everyone's concerns. For some people, I think it's speed. For some people, it's just the presence of cars in general. And so we have tools that address all those things. Some people, you know, like the wayfinding, I think it's really using a context specific solution that targets in general, you know, like a low speed situation, low volume situation.
Yeah, I think that's good, David. And then I will say the only thing I'll add to that, Alan, is one major design principle that's different between the neighborhood bikeways that were evaluated in this UCD study and the neighborhood bikeways that you should see rolled out right now is the design principle of the spacing of traffic calming elements needed along a neighborhood bikeway to achieve target speeds. In the old version, we didn't really have very many tools in the toolbox for mid-block traffic calming. In the new version, we do, and you will see we actually tried to get those traffic calming elements to a closer spacing so that folks, because what we, as you guys might know, you know, if you just place a traffic circle in the middle of nowhere, sometimes that traffic circle isn't actually going to be as effective as you think it's going to be, because people will slow down at the traffic circle and then speed up afterwards to make up their time. It's when you have a combination of treatments along a neighborhood bikeway where you actually start to get those gains, at least in speed, which usually is the number one thing that we know correlates to safety, and then usually correlates most to comfort, as is kind of reflected here. So in the new neighborhood bikeways, that is one design principle that you should see reflected that is different than what was evaluated here in this survey. And I think would kind of hopefully change this metric that you're seeing, that you pointed out.
Great, thank you.
Lucia.
Hi there. I have two questions. One is directly related to the presentation, and another one is something new to think about. My first question is, I put it in the chat regarding, you know, the data that you're gathering, and you just had the NACTO conference a few weeks ago. And are you also like using and sharing data with other municipalities and getting their information for similar type treatments? I know that every city is different, but I would hate for us to constantly be having to reinvent the wheel for it. So I was curious about that. And then go ahead and answer that one, and then I'll ask my second one.
Sure. Yeah, so we are using data. I mean, short answer is yes. That's part of this project as well, where the evaluation report will be comparing what we're seeing in Denver to what we see in other cities across the United States. I will say, even to date, we have used a lot of data from New York City, Portland, and other folks to look at some of these bikeway treatments. In particular, I'll just, for an example, I'll pull the corner wedge treatments. Basically what that is is the kind of the truck apron kind of things at the corner when you have a protected bike lane that reaches an intersection, and you have these things on the corners that make people take a really slow turn around it. That stuff was directly as a result of not only some NACDO don't give up at the intersection guidance that was released, but also a treatment study that was done in New York City by the New York City DOT, where they looked at several different types of intersection treatments and which ones were the best for different situations, depending on volumes and speeds, and number of lanes and things like that. So yeah, we are looking at other data. Of course, we always want to see how it works here in Denver with Denver drivers and with our specific design treatments that we're applying, because yeah, our street cross sections are not all exactly the same, even in Denver, and definitely not the same across the nation. So
Sure. Well, thank you. I appreciate that. My other question is, this year, for the first time in, I don't know, 20 plus years, we've had a really, really wet spring, and it's lovely. Haven't had to water. Everything's green. It's beautiful. However, the Cherry Creek Trail is frequently flooded. It's been flooded almost, I don't know, for over a month for the most part. And then when it gets flooded, after it's not flooded, it's muddy. And, I mean, Cherry Creek Trail is like the bicycle superhighway. I've heard it referred to many times for Denver. But when it's raining, or when there has been rain, or there's a lot of water release from the reservoir, we can't use it. And there's no, like in particular, for example, around Downing and First Spear area, there's no safe way to go around it. There's that area, if you want to, tiny little sidewalk that has a bus stop on it. And if there's somebody standing there, you're really going to have a tough time getting to the trail going over. So my thought is, I'm wondering if DOTI is thinking about these kinds of situations, and when there is flooding on the creek or the river, creating detours on First, taking a lane from the cars until the flooding has subsided, and so we're not putting ourselves at risk. I was just wondering if that's something that's been thinking about, and also keeping track of when it's flooded, when it's not, is really hard. So, like CDOT has like cameras on the roads and stuff that you can go and look at. And it's just something, if you guys ever been thinking about that.
Yeah, no, it's tricky. As you know, like Cherry Creek it's a parks facility, so it takes work between parks and DOTI. But we do have a great working relationship, working with them. And, it takes, like, when they're closing things down, we have to work together to figure out the detours. And so that is something, I would say, room for growth, where, we've had to do it a lot on South Platte as well, with the construction and needs along that river as well. And I think, there's definitely room for improvement too in how we handle the detours. I would say that, like, the reason the Cherry Creek facility is there is because it's needed to get the water out of the city. And then, the second very high need is also moving people, but its primary function is moving water and making sure people's homes don't flood, and, the communities don't flood. And so when that happens, it takes precedent, and then we have to figure out the detours there. So I think that's a good point, and that's something that we can work on with parks to come up with better detour strategies, especially when we know during event, and just be able to plug and play a detour strategy. But it's a good point.
Thank you.
All right, I was going to ask a question first. I might hold on my question to ask a follow-up question to Lucia's. I think it would be really awesome if there was a DOTI resource for individuals that want to use the Cherry Creek Trail on days that it flooded, to have like I don't know if it's a green, yellow, red light situation where you could check before your trip on whether or not it was safe. But I know there's cameras for the trail, but that data is not available to the public. And so you kind of have to show
I think that would be
out.
a parks led thing, but we could, but we could definitely ask them.
Yeah, that'd be great. And then I had a question about rollout and kind of, this might be a little too operational, forgive me, but on the actual construction phase with the bike lanes, I live in the South Central Community Transportation Network area, and I'm just super excited and ecstatic about the work that's gone into it. However, the way the construction's been phased has created some challenges. I don't know if we can dive into that a little deeper, but there's been the paint went down really, really quickly. I think that happened in maybe early May, if not late April. But so the paint has been there nearly for and the major projects I'm thinking of that I've seen are kind of either Sherman, 13th Avenue, and or 16th Avenue. 16th Avenue, I haven't seen as many issues, given that it's pretty similar to the existing treatment that was there. However, on 13th Avenue, the paint's been down for I believe over a month. And it's just turned into a parking lane. So there's what appears to be a bike lane, but we've just created a habit of normalizing parking in a bike lane. And also there's some painted bulb outs that people back in park into, even though there's no signage for them. And so those have been phased in such a way that I'm a little concerned we're actually incentivizing and encouraging the normalization of the behavior to park in these safety facilities.
I would say phasing can be a challenge sometimes, and sometimes we're pushing our contractor community as hard as they can go, and so they're running around like and sometimes it's just not as tight as it needs to be. I totally get that, but in a promise that like once everything is complete, we will give people adequate notification and then enforce it. And then typically after, the first couple days, weeks of a new bike facility and it's been signed and enforced, behavior normalizes to what we anticipated it to be. So it's just one of those phasing constraints that we have because we're moving so quickly.
And then I don't know if this one's the same, but on 11th Avenue, John mentioned this in his public comment earlier about a different intersection, but there was a bulb out, like at the median, basically. It's not a diverter, it's not the right term, but it kind of
Median,
is wider. Yeah, and it pushed the bike lanes out, and the parking is still in the bike lane, so that was an existing bike facility that is now not very passable. Are those parking signs planned to be moved as well?
Yes, they are. And it's all related to the phasing question, Jake. It's and so this is something that we're encountering. And generally speaking, we usually don't have much control over the contractor's phasing requirements. But for the next package, we've taken notice and kind of learned that lesson, even though it is a quick rollout, like David said, and that's why we're encountering a lot of these issues. We do have a little bit of leeway to direct when they do what. And so that's one of those things of like, we should probably put the signs before we put the striping next time, and do the signage work. But again, a lot of that we don't have too much control over. But I think next time we plan to try to direct that as much as possible.
Awesome. Totally appreciate that. Love the quick implementation and the willingness to fail fast. One last suggestion might be, I don't know if it's possible to add that some of those changes are still in progress on the CTN projects page. I think that might make a big difference because I've been getting some questions about like, are they done kind of thing. And that might just help solve some of that community expectations thing. But that's it for me. I don't know if I don't see additional hands at this time. Oh no, I do. Alan. Oh, Jonathan. Here they come.
Oh, Alan's out. Oh, all right. Hey, so yeah, I guess one question I was trying to think through some of the comments that have been shared here in the past. Actually, sorry, I'll start with, just for the benefit of the public that might be watching that can't see the comment feed or the question feed, I'd asked a question earlier about the volume and speed diagram that was showed on the screen. Showed that, you know, we deliver different treatments based on different configurations of the volume and speed diagram. I asked whether that's part of our complete street design guidelines, or it's part of our transportation standards, or if it's something else. David responded in the chat that it's part of our standards. I then got a little bit confused because I thought he'd said that our standard updates were in process, but he's saying that's already one of our standards. So just to make sure I'm not confused and don't sort of confuse the audience here, I'm wondering, David and Brett, if I'm just talking about two different standards. Like what you were talking about in the meeting earlier was our complete street design guidelines are moving to complete street standards, and that volume versus speed diagram is part of like the existing standards document. It doesn't need to be added there, or if it's just a different set of standards. I'm hoping you can help me clarify here.
Yeah, Brett, do you want to take that?
Yeah, sure. So I think it's a matter of terminology here, Jonathan. So when David was referring to the complete streets guidelines being converted into standards, that's the complete, because the complete streets guidelines talks about lane widths and a bunch of other kind of really basic things. By basic, I mean fundamental things along our roadways. That is being actually turned into a rule and regulation, like into our like standards, so that any project that comes through, like anybody in the city would see that. For our bike design manual, we've chosen to go a different strategy, and I think it's been successful so far, because most of our projects are in our design group, implementation group, so to speak, and any development projects basically get passed through the bike design manual anyways. And since bikeway design is such an ever-evolving thing, we were really hesitant to put that into a rules and reg that is a pretty like stone process. Like it's a foundational process. It takes a long time to change. And so we were hesitant to put it into that, but for all intents and purposes, we use the bicycle design manual when talking about bikeway widths. We still use that. And the table that you were referring to earlier, that is used. There's nothing else in our rules and regs that would say otherwise to that. So it is not technically that like rules and reg standard, but it is the standard we use when we design projects, if that makes sense. So what David was talking about earlier with complete streets is that kind of like highest form of like roadway design, so to speak, for some of the basics to get in there. And then the bike design manual really drills down into specifically on bikeways, and we did not see a need to actually make that the rule and reg because it changes so frequently, but it is used just like very, very similarly, if that makes sense.
Okay, yeah, that makes sense. I mean, yeah, the term standards is tough just because it's I don't know, it means so many things.
Yeah.
But sometimes it's actually like you know, MUTCD, it's a very formal standard, and sometimes it's just like, oh, it's just the way of operating. It's the way we operate in the department. So
Exactly.
that volume speed diagram you're saying is part of the bike manual that we use as our guide for how to design and what to design.
100%. Yep.
Thank you.
Alan. Alan, we can't quite hear you, or at least I can't.
It would help if I put my microphone down. Can you hear me now?
Yeah.
Sorry. Were you all able to address Brian Carroll's question about trash removal and bike lanes? I want to make sure we saw that. Let's see. I'll read it out real quick. I appreciate the acknowledgement of the myth on bikeway designs, like things like trash collected in the protected bike lane. What is the process once these things are caught? Specifically interested in how trash pickup conflicts are resolved.
Yeah. David, do you want to take that, or do you want me to take it? Hearing none. So
No, go ahead.
okay.
The question is,
Yeah, how they're resolved. So maybe there's.
How do we address?
I don't know if
Sorry,
he's breaking up for others, but I'll just, David, I think you're breaking up. I think I can go ahead and take a crack at it. How we resolve those. So I think there's two ways I could answer that question. So when we get an issue, request, complaint about something that's out in the field that is being implemented, right? That comes back to us designers, and we have to make an on-the-fly design decision, whether that is talking to the stakeholders involved to make sure to figure out what's the best solution for the traveling public and for that landowner or that service. And in the case of those trash cans, we had to come to a quick resolution on that with our solid waste partners as well. And it's actually a really timely question if you're asking about solid waste in general and how we do that trash pickup when it comes to PBLs. It's actually a really active conversation that I was literally in a meeting earlier this week with solid waste to talk about how we can standardize how trash pickup is dealt with along our PBL specifically. Right now, it's on a case-by-case basis, and with the exception of a couple that we didn't catch, we can usually figure it out on a block-by-block basis, where we, as you might know, on our protected bike lanes, we need some clear space, we call it approach space, at the ends of the blocks that basically result in bulb outs, right? Flex posts and paint bulb outs. So, and a lot of times we can just, with a little bit of coordination with our solid waste partners and notification of the residents, talk about consolidating their trash pickup in those areas specifically, so that bikeway can be clear and parking can be clear. But that's something that we're like actually actively talking about, how we can standardize this, if there's anything in that we can do to kind of make it a institutionalized thing, so we don't encounter these conflicts. There's less likelihood that we encounter this in the future.
Great, thanks, Brett. That's helpful for Brian's question. And then the other, I wanted to follow up on Rob Toffness's community input question from before. So a couple examples in Northwest Denver here, we've seen cases where, you guys would have a robust community input process. You'd consult the RNOs, you'd, have signs on the ground and things like that, and kind of close the process. And then construction might start, or in the late stages of it, someone in the neighborhood might hear like, oh, this is going to impact me in this way. And the design might get changed based on that complaint, right? I think the feedback I've heard from neighbors is like, hey, why didn't I have it? I really like that element that was there that's now taken away based on that person's complaint. Why didn't I have an opportunity to give input after the community process was closed as well?
Yeah, I can take that out. Yeah, I would say it, to frame it like that is maybe simplifying things a little bit. It's not as simple as one person says something and then we change the whole project. I would say it's typically we're trying to balance competing needs and uses, and sometimes there are compromises made, but it's not as simple as like, one or two people chime in and then, we throw everything out, even though it may appear that way, from a different perspective. It's a pretty complex thing where we're trying to balance, but I would say that's where, our Vision Zero goals and our, big picture things are really important, in that they're helping us, still meet the intent and the needs of the community, even if a facility may have to change to a different road, or a particular trade-off is enacted.
Sure. Thanks for that feedback, David. I appreciate that.
Well, actually, I'd like to sort of follow on that, because I'm not sure. I'm hoping we're not talking past each other. If I was hearing Alan right, I think I have a project near me in mind that where this happened. I think the concern wasn't even so much that we're balancing different opinions, because that's the whole point of the community feedback portion. We definitely see a lot of commentary for and against different treatments whenever a road changes. But there have been a couple of sort of publicized examples in the news recently where we had a public comment period. We had like a formal design review period. That review period closed. The next draft following that feedback was done. And then it's reported on some months later that after the comment period closed, some people continued to complain, and then the designs were changed. And I think what Alan's noting here is that there's sort of an incongruity here where it's sort of either the feedback period should be closed for everyone or it should be reopened for everyone. But what it seems like in these reports is that some remaining people continue complaining and they get further changes, whereas folks who thought, well, I had my chance to put in my feedback, thought feedback was closed and didn't get to go out and sort of fight for their opinion as well. And I'm wondering if there's any room for us to ensure that we don't see that continuing in the future. I know one example very close to me is the 23rd segment in the Julian neighborhood bikeway plan. Others have commented that something similar, I'm not familiar with this project, but others have said that something similar happened with removal of a diverter at 32nd and Clay, where public feedback sessions had closed, and then the designs were finalized to that point, and then after later complaints, further were made. And I'm so I guess I'm wondering how we make sure that isn't happening in the future. Like, what can we do to ensure that processes either fully reopen or remain fully closed, if that makes sense?
Yeah, I mean, I know it's a good point, Jonathan. I mean, it's just a tough message to convey because until the project is built in the ground, we try to be fluid and move a project forward and get the best thing possible. But just because there can be changes that happen in the middle of implementation or design that have nothing to do with public comment, something we find or a deliberation. So I think there's a perception that people grumble and that we change tack to the slightest wind, but that's not true. Sometimes people grumble all the time and we don't change a thing. And so I think it's just the perception of the design process being iterative and trying to build good projects, and sometimes they align and address a concern, sometimes the concerns are ignored, and sometimes we have to make bigger changes. And I think it really depends on a case-by-case basis.
Any other questions? I believe we have 5 more minutes on our agenda for this segment. Any other questions from our team? Alan, you're back.
Sorry, I'm just really passionate about this topic. David, Brett, real quick, I think this is an important topic that I know you guys think about, but for the broader group, how do you guys consider equity in terms of where you're going to put in the next bike lanes and networks and things like that to make sure that neighborhoods that have been neglected over the years are being served well in this process?
Yeah, it's a good question, Alan. I would say, we have a big new vision related to that laid out in Denver Moves Everyone and our racial equity toolkit, but that kind of will guide all of our efforts going forward, is viewing projects and impacts through an equity lens. And it's laid out in a much more thorough and thoughtful way than I can articulate it now, but know that it is part of our core values.
Thank you.
Any further questions or comments? Alan, you got one last shot. Awesome.
On that note, I noticed your next community transportation network, as you mentioned, David, was in Globeville and Elyria, Swansea. So thank you guys for living out that value and giving them some great infrastructure through that.
Agreed. Well, David and Brett, thank you very much for your time today. Really appreciate it. It was an awesome overview of everything you're working on.
Thanks for having us. Appreciate it.
Thanks, guys. Appreciate
All
it.
right.
Take care.
Moving to our next item on our agenda, we have our, thank you. We have our Policy and Operations Committee report out. Jamie, are you leading that for us today?
Yes, thank you. I put it in the chat very early, so I don't know if you guys can scroll back and see that. So some of the issues we've been talking about, and thank you, Nick, for updating that the sidewalk campaign thing will be starting soon. We're a little disappointed that that wasn't started sooner. We just don't want the mayor starting off on the wrong foot on that. We also talked about requiring HOAs who have to collect trash fees. Gary has brought that up, and Gary, can't remember. Did you send the letter in, or do we need to do that?
I distributed the letter to our policy committee, and then I'm not sure where it went from
Okay.
there. So
Okay, so we'll make sure that gets done.
thank you.
Other issue is staffing for code enforcement, right away, and trash collection. We continue to monitor the DePena Boulevard expansion, the 13th and 14th Avenue traffic studies concerning implementation of Colfax BRT. We were also been reading and monitoring City Councilperson Ortega's railroad right-of-way issues. This is concerning easements near the tracks when it comes to development. And there's two other issues I could have put on here, and I should, is the Burnham Yard development and also the River Mile project. So we've been discussing a lot of issues, and I think we're gonna, on the 21st, which is our next meeting at 10 o'clock, we're gonna try to prioritize these. I know Alan, I think, had sent out a letter asking if we could prioritize some of the things we want to put forward. So even if you haven't been to our meeting, you're more than welcome to attend. That's 10 o'clock. So if you email me, we'll make sure you get the Zoom address. Just my general observations from hearing like the public comment today and some of the issues that have been brought up, it seems to keep always consistently going back to lack of staffing, whether it's enforcement or whether it's getting to some of these particular singular issues that people bring up. So I'm just curious, and my first question out there, and hopefully this is for staff, DOTI staff, is what is in the budget that's going to help you the next cycle to get those things done? Is there some line items that we're asking for more help? Because like I said, it seems like everything goes back to staffing and not having the ability to enforce certain rules that are already on the books.
Can you do me a favor and summarize that question and in the context of sort of what was being asked?
Well, there were several examples of, singular, there's a particular location that has a problem, or we've talked about the right-of-way issue for more than a year. We have trash pickup issues. And the feedback I've been receiving from the meetings is that we just don't have the staffing to enforce those things, or we don't have the people to go out and investigate those things. So I'm just curious what efforts we've made in this upcoming budget to help address some of those.
Yeah, I mean, on some of these issues, I think that, staffing is one component and resources is one component, but I think that it'll be helpful within those specific situations to sort of do a deep dive within those items that are of subject and determine what some of those issues were. Some of them are staffing, of which staffing could very well be not having the resource there to do the work, whether the resource is budgeted or not. If the resource is already budgeted for that and that's just vacant, then that's not a sort of budget issue because the budget's already there. It's just no one's in that position because it could have been recently vacated or a number of different reasons, right? And so I think that in general, all of these issues can sort of be attributed to just, in that moment in time, probably things didn't sort of line up or work out. But nonetheless, if there are issues where staffing, unbudgeted staffing, could have been the issue, then by all means, we are continually and always advocating with our Department of Finance partners to make sure that the department and within the department, individual divisions and business units have the resources that they need to do what they're tasked and mandated to do. So it's hard to pin it on one thing, because one thing typically, if you have a multitude of issues, one thing typically is not what is sort of needed to advocate for making XYZ thing better, if that makes any sense.
Okay, we'll go back in our minutes and we'll rehash some of those things that we've discussed over the year, because I know specifically the easement issue. From what I understand, there's only one person that makes the decisions whether those easements are granted or not. I mean, that's totally unacceptable. You know, one
Right.
person
Yeah.
to
So I
do
think
that
that
kind of thing.
maybe it could be a good opportunity to just put all these items in a list, and the associated issue, and what was stated, I guess initially was said the reason why said issue couldn't be resolved or addressed, and then we could potentially go back and take a look at those items and see what do a little bit of a deep dive.
Okay, thank you, Earl.
Yeah, for sure.
I'm going to open up to the members of our group if they have any questions on the list here, or have a priority they'd like to talk about.
Well, I'll jump in real quick. We've talked on a number of occasions about this new committee that's looking at ordinance 307, Denver Deserves Streets. And the last I understood was that we're kind of waiting for the new administration. So has there been any further discussion about when that committee is going to get going, and what the schedule might be for implementation of the first major step of that ordinance, which is a massive study?
Nick, if you're talking, we can't hear you still.
Let me try that again. Sorry about that. Talked about this a little bit earlier in the meeting here today. Have had some delays, not necessarily waiting for the new administration, just a few other things going on in the department and the city on there. We do expect that to roll out here in the next few weeks on there. And kind of as we go through that, that implementation timeline and schedule on there, that is a major element of those discussions coming on.
Joe, I thought I saw your hand up. We can't hear you, Joe.
Okay, now I should be okay.
There you go.
I've heard for the many years that the city is understaffed. And I've even been asked by city officials if I knew anybody to fill positions. So there must be some list, Earl, of all the positions you have to fill, and maybe we can help you try to recruit people to fill those. But certainly it's not your realm, but the police and fire and all that, they're always looking for people. And I'm sure within DOTI, there's several different groups that are looking for people. So that has been a problem. We know from the planning department, which again isn't in your purview, they are desperately looking for people. So just any way we can help would be great. Thanks.
Anybody else from our group? Okay, just as a reminder, Wednesday, the 21st, 10 o'clock, if you'd like to join us to help prioritize these and kind of split out what Earl's saying, we have maybe shortages in certain areas because of lack of employees that apply for those jobs, but we also might have departments that just have not filled positions for whatever reason. We need to find out. So that's what we'll be discussing on Wednesday. Thank you.
Awesome. Thanks, Jamie. And on a sort of related note, Jonathan, moving into our action items, but Jonathan earlier today sent out an update on the next coming meetings with a survey for the board to fill out priorities for discussion topics. We had a few topics we gathered last year to set up the agenda for the upcoming meetings, and it actually took us nearly a year to get through them. But those came from you, and we want to recreate that list and make sure that we have a good list for it. So please fill out that survey. There's, I believe, 10 rows that you can add of content in priority order of topics you'd like to discuss. Upcoming topics to paint the picture of what we'll be talking about over the next coming months is We'll have a review of the brand new Vision Zero plan from Rolf. We've heard from Rolf in the past, but with the updated plan being released, we'll get an update on that. And as Nick mentioned earlier in the call, we'll have a follow-up on the budget response document. And then in August, we'd like to explore inviting either the mayor or the mayor's transition team to talk about plans for the department and related budget items. Beyond that, please fill out that survey with additional ideas you have. Part of the reason we want to make sure we do it all through the survey is that everyone gets the chance to really think about the topics that make a ton of sense, and can dive in a little deeper. So definitely add those through that survey, and we'll be following up on those. Looking at the action items list from May, the main item I see is that the policy committee was looking at the railway safety plan, which I think Jamie mentioned is still ongoing. And then Nick, there was a mention that there was a 311 request from that Lucia had interacted with, and there was going to be some follow-up on that. I'm not sure if that one got followed up on. This was an orange fence that the response from 311 was that DPD requested the fence, and that's the reason why it was there.
Right.
I believe, and this came in, I think, as a Cora on there. And Lucia, we did follow up with that, correct?
Yeah, the answer was that nobody knows who the police officer was. Nobody had an answer as to who it was. So
Got it.
it was less than satisfactory, but the fencing is gone. So
Well, I'm glad we got that one addressed on our action item list. Are there other action item list items I might have missed that we need to make sure make our list? All right, then we just have a big one, so no one can miss it, because you only have one big action item task, and that's to update your priorities in that survey that Jonathan sent out. That brings us to our odds and ends. Any other items that anyone would like to discuss today or needs to cover now that we've got a little extra time here for items that were not on the agenda? Lucia.
I mean, this actually kind of goes back to the bikes and stuff, and I don't know if this should be a future agenda item or something that needs to go to the policy, but you know, I saw a presentation last Saturday on Vision Zero and some other infrastructure stuff, and I heard the term that I hadn't heard before, and that is sort of like backbone bike lanes, like backbone, like spines, like Broadway. You know, bike lanes that are on major commercial corridors that are frequently traveled, and kind of thinking about having that sort of be a focus as part of the network rather than all these little bitty things here, but having what are our backbones, you know, and how do we, these are going to be the larger expenditures, you know, like obviously Broadway things. But if we were to get one, say, you know, on Federal or on Colorado Boulevard, so, you know, cyclists and other people who roll can more easily access these commercial corridors without dying. So I don't know if we can put that in the future. I don't know if our policy committee should handle that, or if that's something that we can kind of think about as a new sort of way of thinking about bike lanes.
So I can comment briefly. I know that, well, I shouldn't say I know. I'm pretty positive that the existing backbones, like the real highways like Broadway that move together, I think they came from one of our earlier bikeway plans. And I think our bikeway plan is one of the oldest unrevised plans at this time. As compared to like Denver Moves Everyone that just got updated and a few others that have been revised more recently. I know our plans update on some cycle or frequency. So this could be just a question of is our overarching guiding bikeway plan being revised anytime soon? And if so, how are we thinking about additional or existing bike highways or like backbone projects in it? So that might be that'd be easy for us to note down to explore with the department. Is something like this coming? Is it something we can talk about? Is the plan how it is and it's gonna be that way for 5 more years? We don't know their priorities now, but we can definitely ask Earl, Nick, and others as we look ahead on agendas and see if there's someone that can speak to it.
Thank you.
All right. Other odds and ends items? All right, well, then we all have time this evening, an extra 20 minutes to enjoy some bike lanes then.
Get out there. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.